My dear child, there is a vein of gold running beneath the ground of your life that the world has not yet seen. And the ground looks unremarkable on purpose, because I buried the most valuable thing about you at a depth that protects it from every eye that was never meant to find it. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to reveal is not about hidden potential in the motivational sense. This is about geology, the specific underground, running deep beneath surface that shows none geology of a wealth that was deliberately buried at a depth that makes the surface look ordinary to every person who has walked over it, including you. The surface is unremarkable. What is beneath it is not. You have been measuring your value by what is visible, what you have produced, what you have been recognized for, what has emerged from your life so far, in a form the world could evaluate and assign a number to. By those measures you feel ordinary. The visible output has not matched the internal sense that something significant is there, and the gap between the sensing and the seeing has been producing the specific, grinding, maybe I am just ordinary conclusion that a person draws when the net worth statement only includes assets above ground. My beloved child, your net worth statement has been missing its largest asset. The asset is not above ground. The asset runs deep, a vein of gold so significant in its value that the depth at which it was buried was calculated by the one who placed it to ensure the surface would show nothing until the timing, the readiness, and the world's positioning aligned for the revelation of what was always there. Stay here. What I reveal next is how deep the vein runs, and why the surface had to look the way it looked while the gold was being protected. Type deep beneath if you have been measuring your value by what is visible above ground, finding yourself ordinary by the world's measures, and God just told you a vein of gold has been running beneath the unremarkable surface of your life at a depth that was calculated to protect the most valuable thing about you from every eye that was never meant to find it. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct. Click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The vein was not placed shallow and covered. It was placed deep from the beginning, because the value of what runs beneath your surface required a depth of concealment proportional to the worth of what was being concealed. My beloved child, I need you to understand the relationship between depth and value in the geology of divine hiding. Surface gold is accessible to anyone who walks over it. Anyone can pick it up. Anyone can claim it. Anyone can take what requires no digging, because the accessibility of the surface makes no distinction between the person the gold belongs to and the person who simply happened to pass by. Surface gold has no security, and assets without security are assets that cannot be stewarded, because the accessibility exposes them to everyone rather than preserving them for the one they were placed in. The depth was the security, and the security matched the value. My dear one, what runs beneath you is not a minor deposit scattered near the surface, the kind of small yield discovery that rewards a casual scrape of the topsoil. What runs beneath you is a vein, a continuous, connected, running for a distance you have not yet measured deposit, whose scale the surface was deliberately designed to understate. Because a surface that advertises the gold beneath it attracts every passing miner to the claim. And a surface that shows nothing protects the claim until the owner is ready. You are the owner, and the surface showed nothing because the timing was not yet ready. This message was not released for everyone who feels ordinary. This was aimed at the one person whose specific, deep, I know something is in me but nothing has surfaced to prove its sensing, has been dismissed by a self-assessment system that only counts what has already emerged, while the most significant deposit in the entire ground has been running deep beneath every conclusion. The surface-level assessment was drawing. Type depth is security. If you just realized the vein was not placed shallow and covered, but deep from the beginning. Because the value of what runs beneath your life required a concealment proportional to its worth. And the unremarkable surface was the security system, protecting a deposit too significant to be accessible to every eye that passed over the ground. I have been watching you walk over your own gold since the season. The surface convinced you there was nothing beneath it. And the watching has been the specific patience of a God who buried the vein himself and who has been standing on the ground that contains it while the person walking above it concluded, "The ground was barren, my dear one." Not from beneath the surface looking up. From beside you, walking the same unremarkable ground, knowing what was running deep beneath every footstep you took across a surface whose ordinariness was producing the conclusions the ordinariness was designed to produce in every eye except the one who buried the deposit. I knew what was beneath you. The entire time you were concluding there was nothing. My beloved child, I watched the specific season the surface-level self-assessment was installed. There was a period, early in your awareness of your own value, where the assessment system was forming. The system was choosing its inputs, and the inputs it selected were all visible. What has emerged, what has been produced, what others have recognized, what the world can currently see and evaluate and assign a number to. The system selected visible inputs exclusively, and an assessment system built entirely from visible inputs will always produce an ordinary verdict when the most valuable asset is hidden beneath the surface the inputs are drawn from. The system was accurate at the surface and catastrophically wrong beneath it. I chose you for this message because the instrument that accesses the vein has been approaching the depth the gold has been running at. And the instrument is not a tool you built or a skill you developed. It is a timing mechanism that I have been managing since the day the vein was placed. My child, the timing mechanism just reached the depth of the gold. And what happens when the instrument meets the vein is the revelation the surface has been concealing since the day I buried it. Type instrument reaching. If God has been walking the same ground beside you, knowing the vein was running deep beneath every footstep, and the timing mechanism that accesses the gold just reached the depth where the deposit has been running, meaning the revelation the unremarkable surface has been concealing since the day the gold was buried, is about to become visible for the first time. I know what the unremarkable surface has been doing to the specific part of you where your belief in your own significance is stored. My beloved child, an unremarkable surface produces unremarkable conclusions. This is the cruelty of a concealment system that protects by appearing ordinary. The system works perfectly at its protection function while simultaneously producing the specific identity level. I must be ordinary because the surface is ordinary conclusion in the person whose ground contains the most valuable deposit in the entire landscape. The protection worked. The cost of the protection was the conclusion. My child, I watched the conclusion form through the accumulation of surface-level evidence. Each year that passed without the gold emerging added a data point to the assessment system. Each year, the visible output remained ordinary, while the internal sensing insisted something significant was present, added another entry to the gap between the sensing and the seeing. And the gap, widening annually, producing its own gravity, eventually pulled the assessment toward the conclusion the surface was generating with relentless consistency. Ordinary. The surface said ordinary, and the repetition of the surface's message eventually overrode the sensing. I watched the override happen at the layer where a person's belief in their own hidden value lives. The layer is deeper than confidence, deeper than self-esteem. It is the geological layer, the foundational stratum where the person's understanding of what they contain is formed. And the geological layer was being informed by the surface exclusively, because the assessment system the person was using to evaluate their own content was a surface-level instrument reading, surface-level data about a ground whose most significant content was running at a depth the surface-level instrument could never reach. The instrument was too shallow, not the ground too barren. You concluded barren because the instrument concluded barren, and a shallow instrument's conclusion about deep ground is not a verdict. It is a limitation. The deepest wound the surface produced was not the ordinary conclusion. It was watching other people's ground produce visible gold while yours showed nothing, producing the specific comparison whose verdict said the gold was distributed to other ground, and your ground was simply not the kind that contains what theirs does, my dear child. You watched their surfaces, the people whose gifts emerged early, whose talents surfaced visibly, whose value was apparent to the world at a stage of their journey where your surface was still showing the unremarkable topsoil that the concealment system was maintaining. Their gold was near the surface, accessible, visible, producing the kind of recognition and validation that surface-level gold generates when it catches the light of passing eyes. Their surfaces sparkled, yours did not, and the comparison wrote a geological report. My beloved child, the geological report said, their ground is gold-bearing and mine is not. The report was produced by the same surface-level instrument that assessed your own ground, an instrument that can only detect what runs near the surface and that classifies deep deposits as absent because the depth exceeds the instrument's reach. The instrument read their surface gold correctly. The instrument read your deep gold as absence. Both readings were produced by the same shallow instrument. And shallow instruments do not produce wrong readings. They produce incomplete readings. And incomplete readings about deep vein deposits always look like absence readings. My dear one, the gold that sparkled on their surfaces was surface-level gold, real gold, genuine value, but surface-level in its depth. And surface-level gold produces surface-level impact, accessible early, visible immediately, and exhaustible because surface deposits are finite, and what is accessible to everyone diminishes as the access continues. Your gold is not surface level. Your gold runs deep, and deep gold is not exhaustible the way surface gold is, because the vein extends further than the surface deposit could ever reach. Type deeper vein if you watched other people's ground produce visible gold while yours showed nothing. And the comparison produced a geological report that classified your ground as non-bearing, when the instrument was too shallow to detect a deep vein deposit whose depth and scale exceed every surface deposit the comparison was measuring against. The unremarkable surface was never evidence that the ground was barren. It was the deliberate design of a god who buries high-value deposits at depths that make the surface look ordinary on purpose, because ordinary surfaces do not attract the premature mining that would have extracted the gold before the owner was ready to steward what the ground contains. My beloved one, I need to permanently separate the surface's appearance from the ground's content. Your system treated the surface as the diagnostic. Ordinary surface equals ordinary content. The equation was logical at the surface level and catastrophically wrong at the geological level, because the relationship between surface appearance and underground content is not proportional. It is often inverse. The most significant deposits in geological history were found beneath the most unremarkable surfaces, because significance buried deep does not announce itself at the surface. Unremarkable surfaces and remarkable deposits coexist routinely. My child, the deliberately ordinary surface served a specific protective function during the seasons the gold needed to remain hidden. Premature mining, the early extraction of a deposit before the conditions for its proper refinement and distribution are in place, is the most common way high-value deposits are wasted. The gold is real, the extraction is premature, and premature extraction produces raw material rather than refined wealth. Raw gold has value, refined gold has magnitude, and the difference between value and magnitude is the difference between extracting early and extracting at the right time. My dear one, the surface remained ordinary to prevent the premature extraction that would have produced raw output from a deposit whose potential magnitude requires the specific timing and conditions the concealment period was providing. The conditions are now aligning. The timing is approaching, and the surface that was deliberately maintained as unremarkable during the concealment phase is about to display the first visible evidence of what has been running deep beneath it. The barren just became a claim, and the claim is about to produce. The first trace of gold just appeared at the surface, and the specific, unmistakable, that is not ordinary glint that the ground of your life is producing right now, is the first visible evidence that what has been running deep beneath the unremarkable surface is approaching the depth where the concealment can no longer contain what the vein has been carrying. My beloved child, something shifted within the last few days, not in your circumstances directly, in the quality of what your life is producing. A trace, the specific, this came from somewhere deeper than usual quality that appears in a person's output when the deep vein begins pushing material toward the surface for the first time. Not yet the full emergence, but the first geological signal that something beneath the topsoil is pressing upward. The trace is the vein announcing itself, and the announcement just began. My dear one, I need you to understand what happens when a deep vein sends its first trace to the surface. The trace is not the gold itself. It is the indicator, the geological signal that tells anyone who knows what to look for that the ground beneath the surface contains a deposit whose depth is producing the upward pressure that forces trace material through layers of earth that have been concealing the deposit for the duration of the hiding. The upward pressure is increasing, and what the pressure produces at the surface changes the surface's appearance permanently. I have been managing the depth of the vein behind every season of the unremarkable surface. While you were walking over your own gold and concluding the ground was barren, I was beneath the surface, maintaining the deposit, managing the concealment, monitoring the conditions that would eventually produce the upward pressure the vein requires to begin its journey from deep to surface. My child, the conditions just aligned, the pressure just began. And the first trace is the evidence that what was always beneath you is no longer going to remain beneath you. Type first trace if something shifted in the quality of what your life is producing within the last few days. a glint that came from somewhere deeper than usual, and the shift is the first trace of a deep vein deposit, pressing upward through layers that have been concealing the gold because the conditions for emergence just aligned, and what has been running beneath the unremarkable surface is beginning its journey to visibility. God has been hiding a wealth in you that the world has not yet seen, and the title carries that specific language, because the hiding was active, intentional, and performed by a God whose concealment of the vein was the most deliberate act of protection the ground of your life has ever received, my dear one. I need you to understand the weight of the word hiding. The title does not say God placed potential in you, does not say God gave you gifts, says hiding. And hiding is an active verb. It requires a hider, a thing being hidden, and a deliberate decision about where and how deep to conceal what is being kept from view. Hiding is not passive. Hiding is engineering. I engineered the concealment, and the engineering was proportional to the value. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to the specific self-assessment that has been producing the ordinary verdict. The title says the world has not yet seen. The not yet is the timeline. Not never, not cannot, not yet, meaning the seeing is scheduled, the visibility is approaching, and the has not yet is the last phase of the concealment. The final stage before the pressure from the vein pushes enough material to the surface that the surface can no longer maintain unremarkable appearance the concealment required. The surface is about to change, because what is beneath it is stronger than what is covering it. My child, a vein of gold that has been running at depth for the duration of the concealment carries an accumulated pressure whose eventual surface expression cannot be subtle. The trace was the first evidence. What follows the trace is the emergence, the specific, ground-changing, surface-altering, no longer concealable revelation of a deposit whose depth and scale were always proportional to the value the hider was protecting. The value is about to become visible, and visible at this scale changes the way every eye evaluates the ground it has been passing over. The vein is breaking through the surface right now, my beloved child, and what is emerging from the ground that looked barren to every passing eye is producing the specific, geological, the surface just cracked, and what is coming through is gold revelation that the concealment was always counting down toward. I need you to feel the proximity of the full emergence, not the trace that signaled the approach, the emergence, the specific, ground-splitting, surface-breaking, no longer containable. The depth just became the surface event that occurs when a deep vein deposit, whose pressure has been building across the entire duration of the concealment, reaches the point where the layers above it can no longer hold what is pressing upward. The layers are giving way, and what is pressing through them is gold. My dear one, everything has been building toward this breaking. The burial at depth proportional to value, the unremarkable surface that protected the deposit by showing nothing, the shallow instruments that read the surface as barren, the comparison with surface-level gold on other people's ground, the ordinary conclusion that formed at the geological layer of your identity, the conditions aligning, the pressure building, the first trace appearing, and now the breaking, the surface cracking under the upward force of a deposit, too significant to remain concealed once the conditions for emergence have been met. My child, the cracking is not destruction. The surface breaking is the surface fulfilling its final purpose, because the surface that protected the gold by appearing ordinary was always designed to break when the timing required the gold to become visible. The surface was temporary protection, not permanent concealment. And temporary protection, that has served its purpose breaks beautifully, making way for what it was always covering, rather than resisting what it was always meant to eventually release. The surface is breaking beautifully, and what is coming through changes the net worth statement permanently. Type surface breaking if the vein is pressing through the surface right now, the layers giving way under the upward force of a deposit too significant to remain concealed, and the surface that protected the gold by appearing ordinary is fulfilling its final purpose by breaking beautifully to make way for what it was always covering, because the concealment was always temporary protection, never permanent hiding. The gold is visible, the vein is exposed, and the ground that every eye, including your own, classified as unremarkable, is now displaying a deposit so significant in its scale and so unmistakable in its quality that the ordinary conclusion the surface was producing for every season of the concealment has been permanently overturned by the evidence of what was running beneath it the entire time. My beloved child, this is the moment the surface breaks and the gold that was hidden at depth becomes visible at the surface, and the person who has been walking over their own wealth finally sees what the ground of their life has been containing while the shallow instruments were reading barren, and the comparison with surface-level gold on other people's ground was writing the geological report that classified their ground as non-bearing. The ground was always bearing, the instrument was always shallow, and the gold is here. God has been hiding a wealth in you that the world has not yet seen. The title said hiding. The concealment just ended. The title said the world has not yet seen. The world is about to see. And what the world sees when the deep vein deposit breaks through the surface of a life that looked ordinary to every passing evaluation will be the specific, undeniable, that cannot be explained by what was visible evidence that the most significant thing about this person was never above ground. It was running deep, running long, at a depth that no surface-level assessment could have detected, and that no shallow instrument could have reached. My child, the gold is not a small deposit revealed by the breaking surface. It is a vein, a continuous, connected, running for a distance that the surface never suggested deposit, whose emergence at the surface is only the beginning of a revelation whose full scale will take time to comprehend, because veins the assessment system just encountered uncountable value, and uncountable demolishes countable. My beloved child, the demolition is producing cascading effects across every dimension of your identity, where the ordinary verdict was governing your expectations. The net worth statement is being rewritten, because the statement that excluded underground assets is being revised by the evidence of an asset whose value exceeds every above-ground entry combined. The comparison with surface-level gold on other people's ground is being invalidated, because deep vein deposits exceed surface deposits in both scale and duration by a geological margin. Comparison was never measuring. The revision changes everything the ordinary verdict was restricting. And the revision restructures the way you carry yourself. A person who believes they are ordinary occupies space at ordinary scale. A person who has seen the vein running beneath their ground occupies space at the scale the deposit's value assigns, not with arrogance, but with the specific geological, I know what runs beneath me certainty that changes the way a person stands on their own ground. Type know what runs beneath if the surface level self-assessment just collapsed under the evidence of a deep vein deposit. The net worth statement being rewritten, the comparison invalidated, the ordinary verdict demolished, and the way you carry yourself is changing, because a person who has seen the gold running beneath their ground stands on it with the geological certainty that the surface never permitted. Let me show you what your life looks like now that the vein is exposed and the net worth statement includes the underground asset, and the ordinary verdict has been demolished by geological evidence the surface could never have produced. Because a person who discovers a deep vein deposit beneath their own ground operates at a wealth level the surface-assessed version could never access. My dear one, the first thing that changes is the relationship with the surface. You have been living on the surface, as though the surface was the total. Every decision, every ambition, every assessment of what is possible from your current position was calculated using surface-level data exclusively. The calculations were accurate at the surface and wildly underestimating beneath it. The calculations just gained a new variable, and the variable changes every total. My beloved child, the mornings change permanently. You have been waking into the ordinary, the first conscious awareness of each day, processing the familiar, same ground, same surface. Nothing has changed assessment that the unremarkable topsoil was producing as the default morning verdict. Tomorrow you wake onto gold-bearing ground. The assessment runs. But the assessment now includes the vein, and an assessment that includes a deep vein deposit produces a fundamentally different evaluation of what the day can produce from the ground the person is standing on. Gold-bearing mornings produce different decisions than barren mornings. The opportunities that require deep vein wealth to pursue are now accessible. There are doors, assignments, and partnerships whose entry requirements include a type of value that surface-level production could never have met. The specific, depth-sourced, not manufactured but discovered value that only a person standing on a deep vein deposit carries. Those doors were always visible. The entry requirement was never met because the net worth statement was excluding the underground asset. The statement now includes it, and the entry requirement is met. People are going to notice the gold before you explain the vein, because a person standing on ground that just exposed a deep vein deposit carries an atmospheric wealth that the ordinary surface version could never produce, regardless of how diligently the ordinary surface version was working the topsoil. My beloved child, the ones who walked over your ground during the concealment, who assessed the surface alongside you, who perhaps classified your ground, using the same shallow instruments your self-assessment was using, who drew the same ordinary conclusion the unremarkable topsoil was generating for every passing eye. Those people are about to encounter the gold-bearing version. They will say, they never saw this coming from you. They will be confirming the concealment worked. My child, there is a specific quality a person carries when what was hidden in them begins to emerge. The quality is not the polished confidence of someone who has always known their value. It is the raw, geological, the ground just broke and I am standing on what was beneath it quality of someone whose ordinary surface just revealed extraordinary content. And the rawness of the revelation carries an atmospheric authenticity that polished confidence cannot replicate. Raw revelation attracts differently from polished presentation. Connections that require the specific atmospheric quality of newly revealed deep vein wealth are approaching the exposed deposit right now. There are partnerships whose formation demands the specific value that only a depth-sourced, God-hidden, timing-protected, concealment phase completed deposit can produce. Partnerships whose mechanics require the type of wealth that was never manufactured at the surface, but discovered at the depth where only the right instrument at the right time could have accessed it. My dear one, what approaches ground whose vein just broke through is calibrated to the deposit's depth, and depth-calibrated connections exceed anything the surface-level output was attracting during the concealment. Type raw revelation. If the exposed vein is producing an atmospheric wealth the ordinary surface never generated, and connections requiring the specific quality of depth-sourced, God-hidden, timing-protected value are approaching, because the rawness of a newly revealed deep vein deposit carries an authenticity that polished surface-level presentation cannot replicate. I need you to understand why I chose depth as the hiding method, rather than placing the gold near the surface, where it would have been discovered early and validated the sensing before the ordinary conclusion had time to form. My beloved child, I could have placed the gold shallow. The surface would have sparkled early. The instruments would have detected the deposit immediately. The self-assessment would have included the gold from the beginning, and the ordinary conclusion would never have installed, because the visible evidence would have contradicted ordinary from the first scan. I chose depth, and depth was not withholding. Depth was engineering. My child, shallow gold is accessible gold. Accessible gold is extractable gold. And extractable gold in the hands of a person who has not yet developed the stewardship capacity the deposit requires produces the specific, premature wealth, rapid depletion pattern that surface-level deposits generate in people who access them before the readiness the depth was designed to develop. The depth developed the readiness, because depth cannot be accessed by an unready instrument. And the years of walking over the gold without being able to access it were the years the readiness was being formed in the person who would eventually steward what the depth was protecting. My dear one, I chose you for the deep vein method because the assignment embedded in the gold requires a steward whose capacity was formed by the concealment itself. A person who has walked over gold they could not access develops a specific patience, a specific humility, a specific I have endured the ordinary quality that a person who accessed their gold early never develops. And that quality is the stewardship capacity the assignment requires. The ordinary season was not the absence of gold. It was the forming of the steward. And formed stewards carry deep vein gold differently than early access carriers carry surface gold, with the depth that matches the deposit. The doubt surfacing right now is using the most self-aware objection in its inventory. The voice that says, "You have heard messages about hidden greatness before, and the gold has still not appeared." And this is another version of the encouragement that feels true while listening, but produces no change in the geology of a ground that has been looking unremarkable for as long as the memory can recall. My child, it sounds like this. The language of hidden treasure and buried potential has been applied to my life before. I have been told there is more in me than meets the eye. I have heard the metaphor of depth and concealment and timing. And every time the metaphor was spoken, the surface remained unchanged and the gold remained invisible, and the ordinary conclusion was reinforced rather than demolished, because the words described something the reality did not display. That doubt just applied the timeline of previous metaphors to the geology of a current emergence. And geology does not operate on the timeline of metaphors. My beloved child, previous messages about hidden greatness were spoken during the concealment phase, the phase where the surface was still being maintained as unremarkable, because the conditions for emergence had not yet aligned. Those messages were accurate in their content. They were premature in their timing. The gold was hidden. The gold was real, but the emergence was not yet scheduled. This message is not being spoken during the concealment phase. This message being spoken during the emergence. The trace has appeared. The surface has cracked. The upward pressure has produced the first visible evidence above ground. And a message spoken during emergence carries a different geological weight than a message spoken during concealment. Because emergence has evidence, the concealment did not. The evidence is the trace you already felt. And felt evidence outranks heard metaphors. Type evidence, not metaphor, if the doubt used previous unfulfilled messages about hidden greatness as proof. This one will produce no change. And you now understand those messages were spoken during the concealment phase before the conditions aligned, while this message is being spoken during the emergence phase, when the trace has already appeared and the surface has already cracked and felt. Evidence outranks heard metaphors. During every season, the surface looked unremarkable. I was not above ground alongside you, sharing the ordinary conclusion the topsoil was generating. I was beneath the surface, at the vein, tending the deposit with the hands of a god, whose proximity to the gold he buried was maintained at contact level for the entire duration of the concealment, my beloved child. You imagined a god who buried the gold and stepped back, who placed the deposit at depth, covered the surface, and then observed from above to see whether the person walking over the ground would eventually develop the capacity to discover what was beneath them. A god whose involvement ended at the burial and resumed at the emergence. The involvement never paused. The hands never left the vein. My child, tending a deep vein deposit is not passive preservation. It is active management. The continuous, hands-on, deposit-level work of ensuring the gold maintains its purity during the concealment, ensuring the pressure builds at the rate the timing requires, ensuring the conditions above the surface align with the readiness below at the exact moment the emergence is scheduled to occur. The tending was happening every day. The surface looked barren. There were seasons during the concealment where the ordinary conclusion was at its strongest, where the shallow instruments had scanned enough times to produce a pattern, the self-assessment classified as definitive, and the person walking over the gold was most convinced the ground contained nothing. In those seasons, my hands were at the vein with the most focused attention of the entire concealment, because the seasons where the person most believes nothing is there are the seasons where the gold's preservation requires the tenderest care. My dear one, the barren seasons above corresponded to the richest tending below, and the god whose hands were on the gold during the seasons the surface said nothing was, there is the god whose hands are on the gold right now as it breaks through. I know the exact night the ordinary conclusion reached its deepest installation. The specific evening where the accumulated evidence of the unremarkable surface produced the floor level, this is all I am verdict that settled into the geological layer of your identity with the finality of a person who has stopped expecting the instrument to read anything different from what it has been reading for years. My dear one, not the first night the conclusion formed, not the night the comparison with surface-level gold was sharpest, the night the conclusion became final, the specific evening where the gap between the internal sensing and the visible evidence reached a width the sensing could no longer bridge, and the person carrying both concluded that the sensing was the error and the surface was the truth. My beloved child, I know that night because my hands were on the vein during the exact hours the finality was settling above. And what my hands were feeling at the vein level during those hours was the opposite of finality. The specific, geological, the deposit is at peak density pressure signature. that tells the tender the gold has reached its maximum concentration, and the concealment phase is entering its final stage before emergence. Peak density and deepest conclusion occurred on the same night, from opposite ends of the same ground. My child, the night the person above concluded this is all I am, was the night the gold below reached the concentration level that the emergence requires. The most hopeless moment above ground coincided with the most ready moment below. And the coincidence is not random. The deepest conclusion above produces the final condition the emergence needs, because a person who has fully accepted the ordinary surface is a person whose system will not interfere with the emergence by trying to manufacture the gold from the surface before the vein breaks through naturally. The acceptance of ordinary was the final condition, and the final condition was met that night. Type peak density. If God just identified the night, the ordinary conclusion became final, and the exact hours the verdict was settling above ground were the hours the gold below reached peak density and entered the final stage before emergence, meaning the most hopeless moment above coincided with the most ready moment below. Now that the gold is visible and the vein is exposed and the surface has broken to reveal what was always running deep beneath the unremarkable topsoil, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it is the instruction that determines whether the exposed deposit produces its full yield or is limited by the ordinary identity the concealment installed. Rewrite the net worth statement, not the financial document, the internal one, the identity level accounting of what you believe you are worth, that has been running on surface level data exclusively for the entire duration of the concealment. The statement that counted only what had emerged, only what was visible, only what the shallow instruments could detect, and produced the ordinary verdict from an inventory that was missing its largest asset because the asset was underground. My child, the asset is no longer underground. The vein is exposed, the gold is visible, and a net worth statement that continues to exclude the visible vein is a statement that is no longer incomplete by limitation, but incomplete by choice. During the concealment, the exclusion was involuntary. The instrument could not reach the depth. Now the exclusion would be voluntary. The person choosing not to count what is plainly visible because the ordinary identity does not want to release its position. The ordinary identity must release its position, because ordinary was the surface, and the surface just broke. When you catch yourself reverting to the ordinary self-assessment, and the reversion will attempt to reinstall, because identities maintained for years do not release their position easily. Correct. The assessment with the geological evidence. The vein is visible, the gold is real, the deposit runs deep and extends far. And a person standing on exposed gold, whose net worth statement still reads ordinary, is a person whose internal accounting has not yet caught up with the geological reality beneath their feet. Update the statement. The geology changed. The assessment must follow. You made it to the exposed vein, my beloved child, and I need you to stand on the ground that just broke open long enough to feel what it means, to see gold where the surface was showing barren, and to know the gold was there the entire time you were concluding ordinary from a shallow instrument, reading an unremarkable surface that was designed to look exactly the way it looked. Feel the gold, not the surface, not the ordinary conclusion the topsoil was producing. During every season the concealment was active. The gold, the specific deep vein, running for a distance you have not yet measured, deposited by divine hands, protected by unremarkable surface, preserved at depth until the timing aligned gold that the ground of your life has been carrying, while every visible measure was producing the ordinary verdict the concealment required. The gold was always there, and always there changes everything ordinary was saying. I want to thank you for something the concealment made almost impossible to sustain. Thank you for walking over the gold without leaving. Thank you for remaining on ground that every instrument classified as barren, while the sensing insisted something was beneath the surface the instruments could not reach. Thank you for enduring the comparison with sparkled surfaces that made your unremarkable topsoil feel like a geological verdict on what your ground could produce. My dear child, thank you for staying on your own ground. Because a person who abandons their ground during the concealment phase abandons the deposit the ground contains. You stayed. Through the ordinary conclusion, through the shallow readings, through the night, the verdict became final. And the staying is why you are standing on an exposed vein right now, rather than standing on someone else's ground, wishing you had stayed on your own. Let the tears come. Not ordinary tears, gold tears. The tears of a person seeing for the first time what was always running beneath the ground they almost gave up on. Type gold tears if tears are forming right now, because the ground that every instrument classified as barren just exposed a vein of gold that was running beneath the unremarkable surface the entire time. And the tears are not ordinary, but the overwhelm of discovering that the most valuable thing about you was always there, always deep, always protected, and always waiting for the moment the surface would break to reveal what the concealment was covering. You are not the person standing on unremarkable ground anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one who measured their value by what was visible and found ordinary, the one whose net worth statement excluded the largest asset, because the asset was buried at a depth the shallow instruments could not reach, the one who watched surface-level gold sparkle on other people's ground and concluded the geological report that said their ground was non-bearing, the one whose ordinary conclusion settled at the identity level on the night, the gold beneath them was reaching peak density. That identity was permanently demolished the moment the surface broke, and the vein was exposed, and the gold that was running deep beneath every unremarkable footstep became visible for the first time to the person who was walking over it, concluding barren, while the God who buried it was tending it with both hands. You are the person standing on exposed gold now, and exposed changes everything ordinary was saying. The surface-level self-assessment that governed your sense of your own worth, your expectations of what your life could produce, your comparison with surface-level deposits on other people's ground, and the net worth statement that excluded the underground asset, has been permanently rewritten by the geological evidence of a vein whose depth and scale exceed every surface deposit the comparison was measuring against. My dear child, you were never ordinary. You were concealed, and concealed is not the same as absent. Concealed means present at a depth that requires the right timing to access, and the timing just arrived. From this moment forward, you carry the identity of a person whose God hides wealth at depth. Not a person whose ground is barren. A person whose ground was deliberately surfaced with unremarkable topsoil to protect a deposit whose value was too significant for shallow access, and whose emergence was timed to coincide with the readiness of a steward whose capacity was formed by the very concealment the depth was providing. You are the steward now, formed by the ordinary seasons, ready for the gold the ordinary was hiding, standing on ground whose surface just broke, to reveal what was always running beneath the feet of a person the world classified as unremarkable, while the God who buried the gold knew the classification was the concealment, and the concealment was the protection, and the protection was always going to end when the timing aligned for the revelation of what was never absent, but was always deep. The surface broke. The gold is visible. The vein runs further than the initial exposure can display, and the person standing on the exposed deposit is not the person the surface was showing the world, though they are the person the depth was hiding from the world until the world was ready, and the steward was formed, and the timing said, "Now, walk on your own gold, my beloved child. The ground is yours. The vein is yours. The depth was always yours. And the God who buried the wealth beneath unremarkable surface is the same God standing on the exposed deposit beside you, confirming that what the world has not yet seen is about to become what the world cannot stop seeing, because deep vein gold does not emerge quietly, and what has been running beneath this ground is too significant to produce a subtle revelation. Subscribe to this channel so that every time God exposes the wealth He hid beneath the surface of your life, the announcement reaches you before the ordinary conclusion reinstalls itself on ground that is no longer ordinary. You are not someone who stands on unremarkable ground anymore. You are someone whose God buried a vein of gold so deep and so significant that the unremarkable surface was the highest form of protection available. The next message carries the first yield report from the exposed deposit, and what the deep vein gold produces when the surface breaks will prove that the concealment was always protection, the depth was always proportional to the value, and the ground the world passed over without a second look was the richest claim in the entire landscape. Type gold beneath me if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the surface was concealment, not content, the depth was protection, not punishment, the shallow instruments were limited, not accurate. The ordinary conclusion was a measurement error, not a geological truth. And the God who buried the vein with His own hands and tended at contact level for the entire duration of the concealment is the same God standing beside you on exposed gold, confirming that the most valuable thing about you was never visible, because the most valuable thing about you was always too significant to be left at a depth the wrong hands could reach.